From the latest on Caribbean cruises to kosher safaris, pilgrimages to Jewish Eastern Europe, and award-winning wines and international cuisine in sun-drenched Tel Aviv. Sit back and enjoy the trip with the travel edition of the Jerusalem Post podcast.
Hello, David.
Shalom!
Manishma, how are you doing?
Here we go. It's Ulpan, or Hebrew Class 101 with Mark and David.
And at this point, this is where I graduated. I didn't get much further.
I was talking to somebody the other day who shall remain absolutely nameless.
You mean Voldemort?
Who took Ulpan Class Aleph 5 times and still can't speak a word of Hebrew. It's really interesting. Either you've got it or you haven't. But again, Hebrew is a very difficult language to pick up if you start with something from the more Latin languages, I guess.
I actually find it's more logical than English. So I got to a certain point and I've got the vocab, although I do struggle with the grammar a bit sometimes.
How's your Scottish?
Better than my Hebrew. I think in Scottish I can get nuance and comedy, whereas in Hebrew, I never laugh.
I guess in Scottish you get away with English.
Just about. I think wherever I speak English, people don't like me.
So the joy of Edinburgh, which is where we're going to be heading in a couple of minutes' time, I guess, is that the accent is actually usually pretty soft, gentle, so that we Sassenachs, we English folk, actually understand what's being said in Edinburgh.
I think in the centre, if you get on the new tram system there and take the wrong turn towards Leith, then it's quite heavy.
Can you say the tongue twister that revolves around Leith?
She sells seashells on the seashore. Because it's on the seashore.
The Leith police dismisseth us.
I've never even heard of that one.
Well, there you go. Something for you to practice.
The Leith police dismisseth us.
Exactly. In a couple of minutes, we'll explain why we're headed to Edinburgh. We'll also be going off to Barbados in the Caribbean.
Oh, is there cricket on?
I don't think our guest gets cricket. We are going to be going to Edinburgh in a mo to talk about the Edinburgh Festival. And I realise that you're probably listening to this at some point in or after March of 2024. And the Edinburgh Festival takes place in August. Mark, what happened?
Well, I went to Edinburgh with my son. This was August last year. It was our first boys' holiday together. And then obviously in October, everything happened in Israel. So it's waited until now for us to actually bring it to the podcast.
We're going to do that in a couple of minutes' time. The first voices you will hear will be Mark's guests, whom he met backstage after a show. But now we're going to do something that we haven't really properly done for some time, and that's to give you a couple of quiz questions.
I'll go first. Question number 1. Why is the Edinburgh Fringe called the Edinburgh Fringe?
And question number 2, Barbados, or Los Barbados in Portuguese, is named after a tree. But which tree?
Is it the Barbados tree?
Oh, don't spoil it. The answer's at the end of the pod.
To talk the latest news in Israel, the Jewish world, and everything in between.
This is the J-Post Podcast. I'm Tamar Uriel-Beery, managing editor of jpost.com.
And I'm Tzvika Klein, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post.
And I'm Sarah Ben-Nun, night editor at the Jerusalem Post. Join us as we bring some of the most impactful voices to bring you into what it means to be Jewish, to be Israeli today.
Every week, we bring you with us into the newsroom in every sense.
Stop being so dramatic. This is just our coffee break.
You can find us every Thursday on jpost.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll see you there.
Yalla, bye.
Hi, I'm Philip Simon. I'm here at the Edinburgh Fringe doing my thing.
I'm Rachel Krieger, and I too am here at the Edinburgh Fringe performing my stand-up show, Ultimate Jewish Mother.
What is your thing, Philip?
I've got 2 shows. One is called Shall I Compare Thee in a Funny Way, which is a crowd work show where the audience come up with suggestions and we just talk about those for an hour. And then there's the Jewish compilation show called Jewarama, which we've been doing for the past 5 years.
How disappointed are your parents? You know, doctors, lawyers, you've ended up in comedy. How did you get into comedy?
My parents are definitely not disappointed because within the first few minutes of this podcast, they've been mentioned. So they're delighted. I'm one of 4. In the family, there are 2 lawyers, 1 head teacher, and a comedian. I think they've come to terms with it, and it was an early start for me. I was an actor first. I went to drama school, did 10 years of acting, lost the will to live, and started stand-up comedy, and that's been about 12 years now. So they've come to terms with it pretty much.
And Rachel will probably tell you we've known each other since we were little children. I can tell your parents are very happy for you, but how did you get into comedy?
They're so proud of me because they've got a consultant already. My brother's a paediatric cardiologist. My sister's a midwife. My other brother's an executive with an international company. And I go to pubs and clubs and tell jokes to strangers for money. So it brings immense pride to any Jewish family. But I got started in a slightly different way. I performed a lot as a child and a teenager, but I couldn't really see that there was a career in it for a religious Jew. I didn't really know where I could go with that. So I worked in youth and community work and social work for years and years. But on the side, I was doing musical theatre and this and that, and then eventually the lure of the grease paint became too much. I moved into working full-time in theatre as a writer and director, specialising in comedy. I was already a big comedy nerd and a comedy fan. I was doing bits of hosting. Eventually that built up into an overwhelming urge to do it properly myself. So yeah, that's what happened. Warn your children.
As a travel podcast, we're here in Edinburgh. We're metres away from the famous Royal Mile. And around here there are hundreds of small venues where people like you are performing nightly for the month of August. What does the Fringe mean to you?
That's such a complex question because on a basic level, the Fringe is a trade fair for performers and for writers of all kinds, because there's theatre, there's dance, there's all kinds of other things, not just comedy. But it's essentially, we've talked about this a lot, Philip and I, it's like you're an athlete in training. I mean, I imagine, I've never been an athlete, but in training for a big race, you do all your training and then you do your big races. By the end of that experience, you're as match fit as you're going to be. So when we leave the Fringe, we're as funny as we can possibly be if we've had a good run. And also the camaraderie of it, the experience of building up to it, the kind of doing your job at your best level that you can do it multiple times a day. To me, that is just so exciting, and it's creatively really stimulating. I end up writing loads more new stuff when I'm here as well.
I think for me, the Fringe represents 3 weeks away from my kids, which is glorious. No, as Ray says, it's a trade show, so you have to be here to show yourself, even if it's just for a week of the 4 weeks that it runs, just to remind people you exist and remind the industry that you are viable. It makes you match fit. By the end of it, I'm going home next week. I will have done 80 to 100 gigs in that time. Some of them my shows, some of them spots on other people's shows. I will be bulletproof on stage in terms of just being able to take anything an audience might throw at me. As the months go on, that will diminish slightly. But it's a great training ground. It's networking. It's a chance to build an audience, develop who you are and what you do as a comic, and see what else is out there, what the industry is doing at the moment in terms of newer comics, new art forms.
You're the lucky one. You've left your kids behind. Mine has followed me and is busy taking pictures. Do you want to say hello? No, he's not forgiven me for putting him in the front row of the last show we were in, and obviously he was picked on. So he won't be talking to me for the rest of this trip, so it's not all bad. You take part in something called the Free Fringe, which sounds fabulous, but what is the Free Fringe?
It was set up quite a long time ago by Peter Buckley Hill. It's known as the PBH Free Fringe, or PBH's Free Fringe. And it was really a reaction to the fact that it costs an absolute flipping fortune to be here. Rent prices here are hiked during the summer, so everyone's paying a huge amount in rent, as well as their rent and mortgage wherever they live the rest of the time. Venues were charging a lot of money for people to perform. You had to also have technicians, you had to have other kinds of publicity and PR, and it became such an elitist experience, whereas originally the Fringe was meant to be a kind of ad hoc, everyone together trying to make something happen in the back of a shop type vibe. So Peter took that concept and created the Free Fringe as a kind of collective where we're in pop-up venues, some are actual performance venues, like my show's in a pub called Whistle Binkies, which is a music venue all year round, so it has a stage, it has microphones, it has that kind of stuff, seats, but plenty of people are in absolute pop-ups where they've had to bring bits and pieces resources to make it a venue themselves, and we don't sell tickets. If there's a seat, you can come in, you can have it, and then we ask people to pay a donation if they can of what they can afford or what the show's worth to them on exit. And it means that while we've taken over Edinburgh, if there are people here who are on low incomes, they don't then find themselves unable to actually see any of the Fringe or any of the shows that are on. So it's a kind of much more humanitarian way of doing a really self-indulgent thing.
You've got the money in the bucket at the end. Is it difficult with Edinburgh being such a fun venue to be in to actually keep that money, or are you out all the time with the other performers?
Keeping that money is not an option once you get back to England, because often it's Scottish notes that nobody wants. So you just go to a bank and change them. There's a lifestyle here. You can either be the kind of comedian that takes it seriously like a job, and you do your show, you go home, you work on it, and you rewrite bits, you watch back the video, listen back to the tape, or you go out clubbing late into the night. I did that in the past, and now I'm I'm taking it a little bit more slowly because I'm that much older, and I'm quite happy to do my shows and go home and go to bed. But it is expensive to spend money here. I just bought a sandwich because I'm trying to avoid meal deals. I thought I'd support the local industry, so I bought a sandwich from a local bakery, £6.90.
What sandwich was it?
Gold. It was ham and cheese. A very plain ham and cheese baguette. There was no crisp and drink package with it, but the shops do put their prices up. The price of a deep fried Mars bar is not the same the rest of the year, I gather. So you do have to be a bit careful spending that money, but it really is about the vibe of the Fringe. You want to experience as much of Edinburgh as you can.
I do see that Greg's do a vegan sausage roll for about $1, but if you keep going that way all week, then it's probably not the healthiest thing. I know you're not promoting other people's shows, and by the time this goes out, the Fringe is probably finished, but if you get a chance to relax, what sort of shows do you go to at the Fringe?
I see a lot of comedy because I try and go and support friends' shows if I can. But the show that I've seen in the last, well, actually I saw it last year and I'm going back this year when my husband and son come up because I want them to see the show, was Reuben Kay. I perform sometimes when I'm here in a cabaret called the Magic Faraway Cabaret, which is really fun, and it means I get to see a lot of variety and different kinds of acts. And I actually really do enjoy cabaret and drag as art forms. So Reuben Kay, lovely Jewish boy from Australia and a phenomenal artist, and his show that he has at the moment, The Butcher's Back, is really, really special. If I was going to recommend a show, if it tours in your neighbourhood, go and see. It's incredible because it's very rare to see, I think, a drag performer who's from a country where that is often quite a dangerous thing to be, who is so full of pride about their Jewish heritage as well, and has woven it into this clever, hilarious musical extravaganza. So that's a brilliant, brilliant show.
You mentioned being a Jewish performer. How easy is it to be out and Jewish in Edinburgh at the festival, and does it become more difficult if someone mentions Israel?
It's very easy to be Jewish in Edinburgh. I run a show called Jewarama, which is a Jewish compilation show. We've been at the Fringe the past 5 years, 3 years in the same venue, at Whistlebinkers as well, which Rachel's mentioned already. And we flyer on the streets by telling people it's a Jewish compilation show. I flyer at the end of shows that I've done and I say, if you like Jews, come to this. If you don't like Jews, you can still come to this. It's fine. And most of the audiences we get are non-Jewish. They're people that are just happy to see a variety on stage and the compilation shows. We've not experienced a huge amount of direct anti-Semitism. I think linking it to Israel, to me, feels like they've lost the battle at that point, because as soon as you start hearing that someone's Jewish and then saying, but what about Israel, you're making a nationalist conversation about religion, about something that's anti-Semitic. So it's quite easy to walk away from that, really. But mostly it's been incredibly welcoming. The venues are fantastic. The audiences have been great. There was one experience where a few years ago we were doing Jewarama in one of the venues, and we came in one day and saw that on the table in the green room area where the acts kind of hang out before going on stage, someone had carved a swastika into the tabletop. And there's every chance to play devil's advocate. There's every chance that they didn't know it was a venue for a Jewish show, because at night it becomes just a club and there's no necessary sign. It's definitely that's where they are. So you can play devil's advocate, but assuming it was an anti-Semitic attack, we reported it to the venue manager and they very kindly came and added to the carving, turning it into a beautiful flower, so we didn't have to look at it. It was lovely. They were horrified on our behalf, more so, I think, than I was. And yeah, they just did this extra bit of carving to their own property, and it fixed it for us.
The vast majority of people are lovely, and our peers have our backs, and that is a great thing. I've had a few things when I've been flying, but on the whole, as you said, people are just excited that there's a variety of voices here.
Philip's mentioned where he's been for his lunch. You're an Orthodox Jew, Rachel. As an Orthodox Jew coming to Edinburgh, where can you get food? How would you recommend Orthodox Jews who are coming to the Fringe feed themselves and accommodate themselves?
I'm self-catering because I'm a Jewish mother and that's what we do. I'm in a flat share, so I bring my own pots and pans and bits and pieces and have a little corner with all my own stuff on. I haven't gone out to get a sandwich. I made a sandwich before I left the house. There are a few vegan and vegetarian places that some people choose to go to, so if that's your bag, that's where you can go. But the shul here, Edinburgh Hebrew Congregation, they have a pop-up diner on Tuesdays through the Fringe where they have chicken soup and salt beef and all that kind of stuff, and falafel if you're vegetarian, so they cater for everybody, and that's a delight, and it's quite fun to go. They're all deliciously eccentric people and so nice to chat to and so warm and so welcoming. And also there's a Chabad here in Edinburgh, and they can provide kosher food for you. They do like wraps for lunches, they do kind of takeaway dinners, and you can order that in advance and they'll make them for you, and they're also really tasty. They're fantastic cooks. And then on Shabbat I go for Friday night to Chabad, and I go Shabbat morning to the main shul, and they feed me as well. So honestly, I eat better here than at home, and I haven't had to make it or wash it up. It's a win.
I'm going to wrap up and put you in an awkward situation and you can tell me where to go, but you're supposedly comedians, so can you tell a quick one-liner for the audience?
There's a new Disney-themed witness protection scheme called Lie Low and Snitch.
I'm a proud Jewish mother, and someone asked me what would I do if I found naughty magazines under my son's bed, and I just replied I'd just be proud he was reading.
And if you've enjoyed listening to Philip and Rachel, they have their own podcast. Can you give us the details of your podcast?
Thank you very much, Mark. Our podcast is called Jew Talking to Me, and it's where we chat to people of Jewish heritage from across the entertainment industry about their favourite foods, family feuds, and what their Jewishness was like growing up and how it's impacted their career. We've got loads of episodes. Check us out at Jew Talking on social media. It's very chilled. You won't learn anything new about being Jewish from it, but you might hear some good gossip.
Rachel Krieger and Philip Simon, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk to us. If you're coming to the Edinburgh Fringe in the future, look out for Rachel and Philip. They've been here multiple times, and I'm sure they'll be back next year and for years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Edinburgh Fact File. There are direct non-stop flights to Edinburgh from North America, from JFK, Newark and Toronto. There are no direct flights from Israel, but one-stop flights on Wizz Air, British, Lufthansa, KLM and Air France. If spending time in London, it's as quick and far more pleasant to take a train up from King's Cross. There are buses and trams from the airport into the centre of town. Do not hire a car for time spent in downtown Edinburgh. The big luxury hotels in the city centre include Balmoral, the Caledonian, Sheraton, the George and the Witchery. Further out of the centre, Malmaison in Leith and Prestonfield House, which is in walking distance to the Orthodox Synagogue. Mid-price hotels include Nighting Hill Place, Apex Waterloo, Apex Grassmarket and Salisbury Hotel on the same street as the Synagogue. There are many self-catering accommodations, and for bed and breakfast we recommend the Ascot Guest House. There are no supervised kosher restaurants. Kosher meals can be ordered in advance from Glasgow, Mark's Deli and L'Chaim's Kosher Restaurants and Caterers, and delivery can be arranged. During the Edinburgh Festival, Mark's Deli runs a restaurant in the Synagogue. New vegetarian and vegan restaurants spring up every hour. The old favourites are Kalpner, David Bann and Henderson's.
Now the latest news with the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition. Tourists are very slowly trickling back to Israel. More than 68,000 tourists entered the country in February 2024, compared to 53,000 a couple of months earlier. The monthly figure is down nearly 80% from February a year ago. There has been a much stronger recovery in outgoing tourism. Some 344,000 Israelis travelled abroad in February, only 39% down from last year.
Despite twice issuing profit warnings, El Al took advantage of its near monopoly position and increased its fourth quarter profits by 370% in 2023. To celebrate, El Al ran a special campaign to give away 18,000 tickets to Israel Defense Force conscripts and reservists.
Tourism Minister Chaim Katz has been in Nashville wooing the National Religious Broadcasters Christian Media Convention. He was there to deliver the message that 2024 is the year of American faith-based and solidarity tourism to Israel. More than a third of tourism to Israel comes from the United States, and more than half of those are Christians.
Egypt cancelled a controversial plan to install granite cladding on the smallest of the three Great Pyramids of Giza. News that the ancient monument would be altered caused international outcry. The pyramids are the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that still remains.
Yeshiva University announced a new partnership with El Al to provide passengers the opportunity to listen to Torah classes. The content will include classes by prominent rabbis, educators, and scholars on subjects including legal matters, prayers, and weekly Torah portions.
Israel is the startup nation, a scale-up nation, the unicorn country. Join me, Maayan Hoffman, Deputy CEO of Strategy and Innovation, for an analysis of the most critical Israeli tech innovations today. We'll highlight new tech trends, discuss the latest innovations, and interview at least one of Israel's most promising companies. So if you'd like to know what's on the cutting edge, then this Jerusalem Post show is for you. Listen to Inside Israeli Innovation on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Jamaica, Jamaica.
No, she went of her own accord.
I think I've taken the wrong turn. We're not supposed to be in Jamaica, are we?
No, my friend, we are going to Barbados.
So we're still in the Caribbean?
We still are. We're still in the world of cricket, although our next guest, by his own admission, doesn't understand the laws of cricket, but for that matter, the laws of any other sport.
We spoke to Neil Rechman, who is a tour guide at the Nidhe Israel Synagogue in Barbados.
The first thing we wanted to know from him was how many Jews are there on the island?
I'm 2% of the Jewish population of the island. It's 50 people, and I have all this authority. I'm on the executive committee. There are 4 of us. So I'm happy to share my information about Barbados, especially as it relates to people who are interested in visiting and learning about our history.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
I raised my family in the New York area. I had a job in the recruitment and personnel business for lawyers. My kids grew up and left the house. Unfortunately, in 2016, my wife passed away. I was cold and alone in Westchester County, New York. I had left my work. I was writing. I'm a writer. I have a couple of novels and several essays out. In November of 2016, I did a Google search for Caribbean islands that had a bridge club and a synagogue. Those were my criteria. Rabbi Google suggested that I try Barbados. So I came down with my 2 suitcases and I tried it out and it worked for me.
There's a synagogue district in Barbados. Tell us a little bit about that, the origins of the Jews of Barbados.
I just told you that Barbados has 50 Jews, but we have 2 organizations, of course. So the Synagogue Historic District downtown is actually part of the Barbados National Trust. In Barbados, this is the entity that owns all the historic properties on the island. The Synagogue Historic District is a property that has been in Jewish hands since at least the year 1654. This is the oldest synagogue structure in the Western Hemisphere. Barbados was founded in 1627 by English aristocrats who had been deeded land by King Charles or King James in exchange for loans to the crown. They had their Irish indentured servants with them. This is before the era of African slaves in Barbados. In 1654, this is when Jewish history starts in Barbados. It's only 27 years in. 3 big sailing ships pull out of the mist here in February of 1654, and they discharged 285 Spanish and Portuguese-speaking Orthodox Jews. These people have arrived at a British island. So those of you who know your British history, Jews have been banned from living in England since the year 1290. So the arrival of the Jews in Barbados in 1654 presents two big historical questions. One is, why are there 3 boatloads of Jews floating around? And the other is, why would they call on an English colony where it's known that they're not welcome? The answer to the first question is, there were not just 3 such ships. There are actually 44 such ships. They were sent by the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam. They were sent to Brazil to rescue the Jews of Brazil who had settled in Recife. This is now the modern city of Recife, Brazil. Back then it was called New Holland, populated by Jews who were promised religious liberty in writing if they would settle there. It's like Jerusalem in the Amazon basin. It's unbelievable. In the middle of the 17th century, these are Spanish and Portuguese-speaking Jews kicked out of Spain in 1492. By way of Amsterdam, they'd come to Brazil. They're engaged in the sugar trade. They're trading precious woods and dyes. They constitute the entire population of Recife, Brazil. And then the Portuguese arrive with their Inquisition. The Jews have to leave. So the Dutch West India Company sends all these ships to rescue the Jews of Brazil. Most of these people go back to Amsterdam. 2 of the ships make their way to New Amsterdam, which is now New York City, and this is the beginning of the Jewish presence in colonial North America. The 3 ships that arrived in Barbados, the reason they stopped at an English colony is that the leader of the expedition was holding a letter of safe passage that had personally been signed by Oliver Cromwell. This guy's name is Abraham de Mercado. He was the president of one of the synagogues in Recife. And the letter says, I'm going to translate it into modern English. This authorizes Abraham de Mercado and his Jewish compatriots to practice their Jewish faith in Barbados, and for Abraham to practice medicine. He was a physician. So this is how the Jews came to Barbados.
Moving it forward 350 years, is there just the one synagogue on the island? And can they visit it with you?
I'm a tour guide at the synagogue. Yes, you can visit us. It's a great destination if you're visiting Barbados. It takes about an hour to do the tour. The original synagogue building had fallen into other hands, but was restored in 1985 by the Ashkenazi Jews that were here in Barbados. The original Sephardic community died out in the 1920s. Ashkenazi Jews arrived in the 30s, and then their grandchildren saved the synagogue in 1985. So that's the place you would visit now. Been wonderfully restored. There's a museum there and the cemeteries adjacent, and there is an old mikveh. This is actually the oldest mikveh in the Western Hemisphere that's been discovered there. So there's a lot of historic basis for visiting the old synagogue historic district. There is another synagogue in an area called Christ Church, of all places. This is actually a conservative synagogue, and that's our congregation. We have 50 people. There's no full-time rabbi. We're mostly secular people. We're very devoted. Our regular minhag is Friday night services. You'd be welcome to join us on Friday night services. But we don't have a Saturday morning service. We don't have a kriya. We don't have the manpower to do it. During winter months, the island of Barbados, the population doubles, and we have a lot of Jewish tourists who come here, and our minyan increases tremendously. So visit us at Hanukkah time, where we might have 100 people in the historic synagogue. It's a wonderful event.
I'm sure some of those people would be looking for kosher food. Is there an answer for the kosher traveler?
Yes, there is an answer, but it's not a particularly positive one. If you're Dati and you're really observing strict hashgacha, all I can do is direct you to the Chabad rabbi on the island. There is a Chabad rabbi on the island. And you can find him on the web. Very nice man. He sometimes has access to kosher food. But otherwise, if you're in Barbados on your own and you keep kosher, it's as though you're going to be in some foreign city and you're just going to be a vegetarian, or however you approach it. There's delicious fish, and it's kosher fish. But in terms of preparation and formal hashgacha, there's no rabbi, there's no deli that you can go to where there's kosher food.
Beyond the synagogue and the kosher, obviously there is a much broader Barbados life, and it attracts, of course, many, many tourists. What are the top 2 or 3 things that you would recommend people do other than visiting the synagogue?
Look at Animal Flower Cave. Animal Flower Cay is the very northern tip of the island, and it's where you see the Caribbean and the Atlantic meet. Some months you can see whales up there. St. Nicholas Abbey is a restored sugar plantation that has a traditional old small-scale British railroad. It talks about the history of the British colonial railroad effort in Barbados, which is really interesting. A third attraction is called Harrison's Cave. And these are underground geological formations that you travel through on motorized carts. And it's really fantastic, both for families and for people that are just interested in geology. And it talks about the history of Barbados and the geology of Barbados. Barbados is not a volcanic island like most of the other Caribbean islands. It's part of the South American continental shelf.
Neil, how do listeners find out about tours of the synagogue and maybe about your books? Is there a website?
jewishbarbados.org. No spaces, no hyphens, all lowercase. jewishbarbados.org. If you happen to put in jewishbarbados.com, you'll end up at the Chabad site. And there's a donation button there if you're interested in making a donation to our community. We do an all-volunteer job of keeping this little corner of the diaspora alive with Jewish content, and we're protecting an important historical site here. I'm an author. If you're interested in my books, I have a website, neilrechtman.com. It's my name, nealrechtman.com.
And if we type in neilrechtman.org, we'll end up with a Chabad rabbi who writes books as well.
You'll have the Chabad view of my books. That's exactly it.
Neil Rechtman, author, historian, tour guide, and one day soon-to-be cricket lover. Thank you for being on the Jerusalem Post Podcast Travel Edition.
Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing your audience in Barbados. Thanks very much.
Barbados Fact File. Sir Grantley Adams International is the main airport in Barbados. You can fly direct from New York, Miami, Toronto, London, and many Caribbean islands. Public buses and minibuses run from outside the airport terminal to the South Coast Hotel Strip, the capital Bridgetown, and part way up the West Coast. Given the short distances, you may also want to consider a taxi. There's not too much accommodation in Bridgetown, with most hotels on the South and West Coasts. Recommended hotels include Radisson Aquatica Resort, Coconut Court Beach Hotel, Hotel Pond Marine, and the Crane Resort. The bottom line with the weather, it's near the equator, so it's hot. Wear suntan lotion and a hat, think about taking a parasol, drink lots of water, and look for shade. Among foods to try are fish cakes, fresh coconut, and roasted peanuts from street vendors. Chefette is the local fast food chain, and Oistins on the south coast is the place to be for fish fry on a Friday evening. Chabad of Barbados offers Shabbat meals on Friday night and Shabbat morning. The Chabad website has a list of hotels close to the Chabad Center. Fully vegan or vegetarian eateries include Trini Double's Food Stall, The Ultimate, and Renante Foods.
What a great podcast.
It was. I'm going to go and look for flights from Edinburgh to Barbados.
We have so much that we aspire to. At least you've got to go to Edinburgh, which is such an amazing city.
It's not the first time, and I would happily go back again. Actually, I had a lovely time because I went with my son, and I think it's the first time the two of us have gone on a boys' holiday ever since he became a man.
Oh,
and that was his bar mitzvah a long time ago.
So he got to meet your star performers.
He got to meet my celebrity friends, Philip Simon and Rachel Krieger, who perform at Edinburgh most years and can be found on the comedy circuit in England, and can also be found at the Jew Talking to Me podcast.
And we should also say thanks to our friend from the Caribbean.
Whose name David can't remember.
No.
Go on then.
Neil.
Neil what?
It's Neil Rechtman.
Who was lovely.
Of course. You sound surprised. Oh, good Lord. Thank you, all three of you, for helping to make this a great podcast. Folks, please subscribe. or follow. It's very easy to do, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else for that matter.
And obviously you can find us on the Jerusalem Post website.
Please tell your friends about it. Give us a 5-star rating. And of course, you can always email us your comments, but please only if they're nice. The address is markdavidpod@gmail.com.
Should we do the quiz answers?
Surely.
Question number 1. Why is Edinburgh's Fringe Festival called the Fringe Festival?
Oh, you want me to guess?
Yeah.
Because originally it was people from Honolulu, and when they greeted you, they had those sort of like fringes on the grass skirts.
No, the real answer is when it first started, you and I had fringes, which we don't anymore. It's sad.
Yes.
No, the real answer is in 1947, 8 theatre companies turned up uninvited at the Edinburgh Festival and couldn't find a venue because it was in the middle of one of the biggest festivals in the world. So they found smaller venues on the fringes of Edinburgh.
Hence Fringe.
Correct. Nothing to do with being bald.
Okay. And question number 2. Barbados, or Los Barbados in Portuguese, is named after a tree. Which tree, Mark?
The Barbados tree?
Yes, you said that at the start. Well, it is the Barbados tree, but the Barbados tree means the bearded one, or the bearded fig tree.
I like your quiz questions. They're quite easy.
Why? Because you said Barbados.
Yeah. What's Barbados named after? Barbados.
There's no point in even talking to him when he doesn't want to listen.
Can I make a special request?
Go on.
We're going on another trip soon.
Yeah.
When we go through duty free,
Yes.
remind me to buy some headphones because I'm tired of picking out bits of headphone from my ears. I think it's affecting my hearing and my brain.
I have to say, every time we finish recording here, we're wearing headphones. He pulls his off. It's his own pair from about 30 years ago, and he starts to get black bits growing out of his ear holes.
And as I get older and there are more hairs in my ear, anyway, you don't want to know that.
Oh, it's definitely time to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.